Okay, this is the kind of money left over after taking an income and the maintenance costs. And then also, everybody did shifts up for all their political concerns. There's a lot of money available right now to a lot of the powers. So Spain, with no army, basically, these two fleets they have to maintain, has a fair amount of money. But that's only say 4 of these infantry, which is about equivalent to the force that Switzerland just automatically generates. Granted, the French have to pay $1 each to use them every turn, but that's just maintenance costs, right? So the Swiss are really a powerful option and probably unhinge things. Whoever gets their hands on them. Spain might want, since there are no Swiss here, to challenge them and try to at least make the French pay a shitload of money for their control of the Swiss. But the French have already paid $5 in maintenance for them. Let's see who else. The Swedes and French both have nice amounts of territory and good amounts of money and fair-sized troops in fairly good position to Palatinate. Their army's been destroyed. Their money does not correspond with the difference between what France and the Palatinate, France and Sweden are able to do. So they're beginning to look like a weaker and weaker power as time goes on, and they may really want to try to do something about that. Bavaria, like I said, essentially destroyed. And Austria is not in great shape. It was similar to the Palatinate. Lots of territory, but no big army. And a little worse than the Palatinate, their cash flow is just not as good. They might be able to build up an army that could face any of the powers except the one who happens to be really close to them, which is the Swedes. That's going to be a painful, painful position to be in. And now everybody's got to make their choice. Do they want to build more units and try to engage in combat, which can be very, very expensive, or make bids on things, which ends up kind of a balance between who you're aiming at? So, if you're aiming at Bavaria here, well, you can grab their last territory probably fairly cheaply or drain them of their money. But who cares? If you're aiming at someone else, because essentially they can build, a couple of units at most and no leader, or, well, yeah, their leader has to come in Bavaria, I think. So that's going to be problematic for them. They really have just about no way of making it out of this alive. They could bid for a mercenary, I guess, but then they don't have the money for the leaders if they do so. Could give their territory to a mercenary and then they have no income. They're just in a hopeless shape. All right, we'll see how it all turns out. After a little bit of buying and bidding, things turn. The Palatinate gets the Austrians to agree. The Austrians have one key vote in Bohemia right here to the edict banning. Actually, it's only a half a vote, but it's enough. Banning foreign troops. This is huge. Because otherwise, things look like they're very strongly in favor of the Swedes or the French. But, well, the Swedes mainly. The French don't really have that powerful a force. But again, the forces under the ban may well be willing to accept that ban, as before, where the Swedes were willing to. Here, it must leave any states they do not control, which would mean, I think I'm still allowed to use Brandenburg or Saxony to prosecute the war. I'm not sure. But outside of that, and likewise, well, one kind of wonders about the Dutch, whether they should be allowed in, but because it's not specified, or the Poles or whatever, if they were freed to attack, which I don't think is possible. But anyway, well, how about the Swiss? So we kind of have to, again, make up rules as we go. or else just say, well, Sweden as a power, including Saxony and Brandenburg, isn't allowed to, which doesn't make one whit of sense. No one would object to Brandenburg or Saxony engaging in the same kind of warlike attitudes as others. Anyway, with the fallout from that, we ended up with the Swedish-French alliance remaining as the Palatinate and the Austrians pull over to their own. Neither one sees any particular value to being allied to Spain or, and specifically, both see a penalty to this, to Bavaria. But this might allow Bavaria to survive. I did allow the Palatinate to build one of their leaders over here, and I think that would make it so that if the Bavarians get troops, which they could buy, they put a bid in for a gendarme that they did not get, on a later turn they could end up buying one of their leaders over here and not have to rely on a mercenary, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, what they can't do is they can't build their national troops without the nation, which makes more sense to me, because these leaders, some of them are not nationals. For example, the Palatinate ones, or the Calvinists, are not from the Palatinate. They're certainly not Bohemians, other than Thurn. I'm not sure if he was Bohemian, but he commanded their army at least. Okay, so I think we're about ready. And let's see where this all takes us. Open things up by breaking the band. First of all, over here, this just fell on its own. Remember, it was being besieged. But then they sent the force that was there through Silesia into Moravia. I kind of forgot about the band, having been away, but I think it worked out okay. And then marching out of Bavaria into Palatinate, taking that, swinging back down to Salzburg. Now, I could go for a forced march and try to take another province, or maybe split my force and not roll for all of it. But as things stand, I don't know that that's terribly necessary. Leave some territory for my allies, the French, to take down here. The big problem is that the forces of the Calvinists here aren't really as overmatched as the Austrians. But what we're hoping to do is kind of destroy the Austrians the same way that the Bavarians have been destroyed. Just focus all of our power against them, take them down, and remove another enemy from the game. And as things stand, the current alliance that seems stronger is that French-Swedish one. And the stronger partner out of them are the Swedes, which kind of makes it look like they're going to get the overall victory if nothing, strange sort of realigns. Now, obviously, there's a balance of power aspect to this, and the French could well end up, the Swedes could well end up as the only power standing on their own, the way the Palatinate did earlier. The next pick is the Spaniards, and rather than just, jumping in and doing them, they're faced with a tough decision here. They could sit back here, collect their $10. They won't get much of it, but they can rebuild another unit or so. And kind of allow the French to hurt themselves against others and try to rebuild. But I don't think that's going to work. One, there isn't that much money coming in compared to what I have to pay in outlay. And two, although if I got rid of those damn fleets. And two, there's valuable things that I can grab, take away from France. Force France into the choice. Do you fight the Austrians, or do you go protect your valuable territory? What do you want to do? A little bit of excitement. The Spanish went and took Milan, but were weakened enough by their attack on it that they couldn't go forward and hit this French army, which they're... I'll move these guys. No. This is our big danger. We don't have to worry about an advance into Savoy. Only Milan can be taken from the Spaniards, if I'm doing things correctly. After that, the Austrians, they basically just gathered their force, but then the French did a number of things. First of all, swept through Luxembourg and all of the Spanish Netherlands. That required a forced march, I believe. And by taking all of that, they left behind an artillery here, so they didn't have to roll for that. By taking all of that, they took a major conquest there, but then here they came back through the Valtellines, took Milan back, then swung around, taking Tyrolia and Augsburg, which puts them in a pretty potent position. There's a couple of players left to go. The two Protestants are still there. And that's it. But you can see Spanish neutered again, shoved back. No reason to attack them, although I could wipe out some units and cut back their total production for next turn. It's so expensive to just keep whittling them down like that. They're not going to be much bigger than they were this turn. Whereas if I keep gathering territories, the French are going to have more capability to buy out of the mercenary pool. Also, the Austrians are getting whittled down to nearly nothing. I mean, you can't call that nearly nothing. They have a lot of territory, but it's not worth a whole hell of a lot, and they have almost no army to hold that together. They couldn't even challenge the Brandenburgs here, Brandenburgers. But the big powers are coming to play now. Sweden and Palatinate. No, Sweden's already gone. Palatinate and the very little Bavarians. They may not make it if Palatinate goes first. Yeah, it's kind of a hard call. Do you want to just knock somebody out? Or do you have something better to do? There's something better, obviously, being trying to retake the Netherlands or Luxembourg, which is cheaper to take. And turn 8 polishes off as we push into turn 9 with the Palatinate grabbing Luxembourg and part of the Netherlands here. The Spanish Netherlands. And obviously Bavaria has nothing they can do. The Palatinate-Austrian alliance is kind of considering, hey, do we want to maybe throw some money at Bavaria and try to restart them? It wouldn't take a lot, and they become kind of a threat in the Swedish areas. They have a bunch of commanders available, which could make them somewhat more interesting. It's not as flexible as having your own forces, though, and obviously not as advantageous in terms of the victory situation. Speaking of the victory situation, it's something I wanted to talk about, because we're going to have a random game end situation, because nobody's hitting the automatic victory, it seems. So, not next turn, but the turn after, at the end of the turn, there's a chance the game just ends. Now, these kind of random ends, they can be either satisfying or very unsatisfying, depending on your flavor and taste, sort of such things. On the one side, they do get rid of certain attributes of games that have sort of a fixed ending of time or a goal ending. A goal ending, for example, if you could only win by getting the full victory conditions, well, and that would be completely ahistorical here, but what that does is it can possibly stretch the game out forever. You see that. I can't dig it up because I don't have the box anymore, but the old Machiavelli, if you played with the full victory conditions of that, it was so easy to prevent someone from winning because it was very hard to knock someone out, unlike in diplomacy. And you kind of have that here as well. It would be very, very hard for the balance of power not to right things and keep them even. I think the same would be true of diplomacy played the way the rules are, which is, you know what? You have to come to the full victory, and if you don't manage that, you don't have any kind of buddy dip where you can kind of split the board or something and say, yeah, we've all won. There's sort of a draw element to everybody who's left on the board, but it's not as vital a victory as winning against everyone. Anyway, the random ending, and Phil Eklund likes to use them. A number of other games use them as well, where the Coin series to some extent uses it. You're left in this kind of, oh, geez, one turn earlier or later I'd been fine, but it was my rebuilding turn, or whatever, and it just feels sometimes cheap in terms of the victory situation. In terms of the historical truth of the game, though, something like this, it feels absolutely dead on accurate, because basically there just came a point where the powers could no longer really sustain the war effort, and they kept trying, but the actual fixed position of the battle lines came down more to kind of vagaries of the alliance process than anything that was very easily controlled by any of the leaders' powers. Now, that could be baked into a game, but it's very, very difficult to do, where that sort of wearing out kind of forces the piece eventually. And I think you would get a result that would still have a randomizer and wouldn't be too different from this, in effect. You would just be kind of scoring how badly have you wrecked Europe, would be really the deciding factor. And as the war goes on, and as things change hands, and as battles proceed, you get more and more cases of, more and more opportunities for the game to end. Another neat thing, speaking on historical type aspects of this, the lack of big battles. Skirmishes, this, that, and the other. But the really big 30 Years' War battles, there weren't a whole hell of a lot of them. And I think this game captures that flavor very nicely. It's more about the maneuvering, the political and economic and military maneuvering and sieges and such not, just conquering things, than it is about these face downs of the big stacks that actually ever necessitate going to this. I've only gone to this, 3 times now, I think. And the game is sort of a balance of power maintained incomes all within a fairly narrow band, basically ranging from about here to here, and then at the end of the income phase, and then slowly beginning to decrease for everyone as the war got ugly. But now, with 2 countries basically knocked out of the war completely in terms of having almost no value at all, we're beginning to see some folks with good, rich incomes. Now, they also have bigger armies, so, but they're going to end up with a fair amount of money to invest as well. And some of that money is going to go into their conquests to keep building up that little economic machine. The Habsburgs, or the Austrian Habsburgs, are the only... they feel like a real also-ran. And in a sense, so does the Palatinate. It's like the 2 top players are teaming up together to wipe out the second place players, and these guys are just out of it, basically. But we'll see, because Spain is definitely still in a position where they're going to be hindering the French. They don't have much option in the other direction. As we go further, the purchasing units, this is a tough decision to make. It always is. I've done it, but I just did it. But basically, it's going to cost you money up front before you put your bids in, as to where you want to drop your leaders, if you have any. You don't know, in any case, whether or not you're going to get a mercenary during this decision making. And then you've got this, okay, if I spend all my money, or most of it, I could be risking my political situation heavily, and I can't grow my political situation. I'm more and more been devolving towards protecting my political situation with the money, and then nobody actually taking any actions during the political phase because they want to save their money so that they have enough to protect their political situation and to build new units. Anyway, what makes it really hard with just the building units, though, is it costs you $3 to put a leader down. You kind of need a leader, and you kind of have to build a force big enough for that leader to command. So you need, around the 5 units that a leader can hold. So right there, you're looking at buying 6 units, say at about $3 each on average. That's like a $20 investment. That's a hard amount of money to come up with if you're, say, Austria. So if you're close to the size of what you can lead with one army, and I had to build a leader this turn, so I was lucky. I already had the army, just didn't have the leader. it's pretty easy. Just buy. No, if you're close to the size of what your army can hold right then, making the jump up to the next size army is a tough choice. Now, obviously, you could make yourself two smaller armies, buy a couple of units or one unit and a leader, and maybe have 2-3 stacks wandering around. And you can actually pad your army, make your army bigger, try to grow into a Swedish type army with all the leaders in one place that way as well, which might be wise. But generally I'm balancing off and trying to figure out, okay, I've got a functioning force here and a functioning force here, and yeah, the Palatinate had enough money, they could throw it in and build themselves a kind of crappy new army, but a new one in an area where they're not really having a problem. And here's another thing. You don't know where the diplomacy is going to take you when you're buying. So you've got all these unknowns that you've got to prepare for as you're buying your army. And now we're going into the diplomatic bidding phase. And I don't expect much to shake too heavily. But who knows? I mean, somebody could just buy Bavaria out of the game, for example. I'm having a hard time coping with figuring out the bidding, in part because I had one thing that happened was I had a Palatinate counter here, and the card was over here, and I think the Palatinate owned it, but they've certainly been playing as though they owned the territory for a long time. I transferred it over. I know the French had it for a point, though, so I just don't know. Anyway, I think what we're seeing for an alignment is the Palatinate is offering Sweden once again in the bids. They first of all, they made a bid on Hesse Darmstadt just to drain the Bavarian money so that they never become a threat. And yeah, that sucks. You can't do that with home countries, I think. And they also bought something away, Baden, because it's a Protestant country, so they have the advantage of the whatever the edict was that allows them. They have double bids on everything, basically, on all the Protestant territories. So now they're looking to the Swedes and saying, look, I'm not going to remove the ban right away because I really, really want to drop another ban down on the French. And, well, the problem is that ban would mean the Swedes would be affected by that too. But here's the thing. I want to get the French to violate the ban so that I can so that they're at a disadvantage where I can pick them off. But we are natural allies. And maybe I'll remove the ban at some point, or maybe you'll be able to force me to due to the voting. You hold 3 of the electoral crowns, I hold 4. Right now I've got the edge, and I can do what I like when I like. I think it's to both of our advantages still for you to concentrate on the Austrians, which is what you were doing whether you're with me or with France, and me to concentrate against the French, and we'll both grow that way, in a way that we would not otherwise. The question for the Swedes is, which is the bigger threat? Is it the Palatinate right now, or is it France? Which do they, and to some extent the bigger threat is the Palatinate. But if I've got the Palatinate against my border, they might take some of my stuff, while right now I can clear out Austria and finish them off, which seems to be the appropriate thing. So we're going to see a realignment here, where the Protestants reform and the Austrians and French will create the Catholic League. We're sure not going to offer the Spaniards into that. And I don't see any real advantage one way or another to the Spaniards joining the Protestant Union. The question, of course, is, what about the Bavarians? They're kind of pissed at the Palatinate at this point, but there's just nothing they can do. It's not like French or Austrian troops are coming near Hesse Darmstadt anytime soon. So, there we are. The edict this time will be a new ban on foreign troops. And that forces France to make their choice. Do they want to come under the effects of that ban, in which case their bidding becomes penalized the same way Sweden's is, or do they want to basically be just a target who can't attack anything? And there's a real advantage to attacking things. And anti that player is not really a penalty if you have things up in the control stage. So it's not like people are really capable of draining Sweden money-wise or anything by bidding against them. Austria might have some interest in doing so, but they just don't have the money to do much. So I guess that's all we have there. We'll put the cups in, or the markers in the cup, and start another military round. And this is the last turn that we're safe from the game ending. Oh, the Austrians open things up. They grabbed Moravia. It was a painful fight. They've gathered the rest of their forces here in Lower Austria. It's not enough to hold off the Swedes, and the Swedes are almost certainly going to try to break that army. Because once they do that, then they can move forward and take other things. The thing is, Austria is not that valuable a prize, so it might be more worthwhile to grab, say, Bohemia, which still has the electoral crown. Well, which always will have the electoral crown. And the other side, we had the Palatinate and allies go, and they swung a big force through, wiped out the French up here, and ended up taking Metz and Lorraine, along with the Spanish Netherlands. The other force went in, took Strasbourg, and then marched up and finished off the Bavarians. And my way of handling the Bavarians from now on, they're a minor state, kind of like Brandenburg or Saxony or Poland. If they go neutral, they recover their forces and then become a real force. But unless they go neutral, they're just going to be a conquered territory from now on. And the leaders that they have would represent that old faction. So Wirth, Mercy are both good leaders. We actually don't even have anyone who, in a sense, I would almost say, wow, that almost frees them up, but I don't want to give that benefit. There's no way the Palatinate would have destroyed them if it gave a benefit to the Swedes, where they would get to start building a Bavarian force. Bavaria's got to go neutral for it to become a country again, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, just making up rules as I go, but that's pretty normal for me. This France-Austrian alliance is not going to be able to hold up long. But basically, Sweden and Palatinate are saying, one of us is going to win, the other one's coming in second, and Austria is probably not going to exist. Spain and France can't be knocked out of the game because they both have the off-board zones where they can continually build troops. They have these reserve economic cards, which can't be impacted. So France is always going to be a fairly big power. Spain, somewhat less of one, but that's okay. This kind of feels more like it puts the burden on the Palatinate rather than the Swedes, this alliance, but, you know, rather than try to figure out and count out the victory points at this point, it almost feels like them working together makes sense. You know, if they don't want to stop and do a straight victory point count, I think it certainly does. And it doesn't feel like the Swedes are going to grow at a greater rate than the Palatinate can. Even if they have this big army altogether, the Palatinate's growing to a fairly large size. At some point they may break apart. Once France and Austria are largely neutralized, but at this point they're still gobbling up the land and preparing for their own titanic struggle for the control of Germany. And remember, Sweden has no real interest in the Imperial Crown. They're perfectly happy as long as either they or the Palatinate has it. Now, the Palatinate gets more points for having it than Sweden does. So there is room for a conflict here, but we're both padding our points pretty well, and it's absolutely not clear to me which one's in the lead. They're both doing so well that without actually doing a count, have no way of determining. And I kind of don't like making counts in the middle of the game. Games that track victory points, where they're just right in front of you, like, I don't know, things from the Coin Series, Fire in the Lake there, I have Andean Abyss. Those keep you a victory point track throughout the game, so it's no real burden to keep an eye on that. And also, you know, other than the automatic victory, it's not really an issue. Now here, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. That's a 25. Now, obviously they're not, you know, it's going to take a couple turns for that to roll in, but we're getting to the point where it is getting kind of risky. Of course, the game might be over before then. Okay, so the Spanish move forward. They take Milan, can't go any further. Just in terms of they were facing too heavy a force in Savoy, and they want to hold the one link to where their reinforcements, their national reinforcements come from, and they can't build infantry unless they build the national ones. Sweden struck through, took Lower Austria and Styria. Upper Austria they tried to take, but their cav got kind of defeated by a siege. They were forced marching and chose to make it an actual siege. So when the Austrians come up next, that'll be resolved. The Swedes feel like they have such a preponderance of force in this area that they can afford to split up like that, but it may mean that this force gets destroyed by a larger Austrian builds next time. Then to the French, and the French gather their forces together and attack in Lorraine, and that's what we've got set up here against the Palatinate. Now that may be a huge mistake. If this were a fixed alliances or semi-fixed or whatever, there would be good reasons for making this strike. The Palatinate's the stronger power, they're winning the game, whatever, you know. They're one of the challenges for winning. But here's the thing. The real decisive factor in all of this is probably what happens between the Palatinate-Sweden alliance. France can't win as long as that alliance stands. And if they're hindering the Palatinate, that makes that alliance more attractive to the Swedes. Of course, it may make the Palatinate swing over to an anti-Swedish position. That being the possibility there. And that's why it's maybe not a mistake. But hitting the Spaniards, they'd be able to wipe them out much more easily, and presumably that would make the Palatinate seem like more of a threat with their big count of cards. So it's really hard to make this kind of decision. I went this way just because that's where my gut told me to go, and I think it may be a mistake. We'll see how the fight turns out, though. It looks like a pretty close one. We got a lot of troops on both sides, hence this. Not a lot of terrain, a couple forests. This is just a stream, so it can be crossed. That was a very, very hard-fought battle. No game turn end check yet, except for the normal victory point. Yeah, did you get an auto victory? The French ended up winning the battle in Lorraine. Very little left. This, a couple of units here, marched into Luxembourg, finished that off with a siege, and took that as well. Luxembourg's an important point in terms of points. This actually really hurt the Palatinate, not just in hitting their big army, which wasn't huge, but it took out two of their last leaders. They only have Maliendar here left, which that's a significant effect on them, and they may have to start digging into the mercenaries just to be able to fight with any effectiveness whatsoever, because they can't move without leaders. They do have one left. They might be okay for next turn, but very shortly, if the game continues long enough, it looks like they're going to be in a lot of trouble. I noted last turn, and it's getting more and more extreme, the imbalance of income. Sweden and France up here, Palatinate down here. And then, you know, as powers become more and more dominating and others start falling off, this is what it ends up being. Now, you don't see this in the final results because you use that income to bludgeon your opponents, build up armies, put bids in, etc. But you see a little bit more padding for the stronger countries, maybe, just because they can get by a little safer. They're not going to be the ones who are drained to the bottom due to the bidding wars. Okay, so I purchased armies up to that stage, and we got quite a bit here. There was one gendarme available. I don't remember where I went to. I think the Swedes got it. And they have a fairly large army that they've built up, additional troops in these locations. French built up another big army here, built up their Swiss territories. Spaniards increased the size of their army as much as they could. They're down to 0, which means they could be picked on if they held anything, but they don't. So, haha. Austrians didn't have a whole hell of a lot of money. They have a lot of territory at risk. So they built up what they can. Now we're on the bidding phase, and there's some interesting aspects here. First of all, there are some people who are interested, very interested, in picking up a mercenary. Sweden, for example, could use one. I forgot to mention last turn, France essentially broke the penalty box by using, at the very least, sending Turin into Luxembourg. And what that means is they too now are penalized at double cost bids. I think if the ban is revoked, it's going to revoke both those bans, or the effects of both those bans, so I can't just cut a deal with Sweden. That's problematic because Sweden really wants the ban removed, and they're the Palatinate's ally, and the Palatinate would be in a lot of trouble against both France and Sweden. So they're trying to look at some sort of deal that they can come to where they'll be allowed to survive, essentially. Now, one interesting aspect is the Palatinate holds, doesn't really have anything near it that they can take. And if they ally with the Swedes and the French, they would essentially perhaps be saying, okay, I'm good, you guys can expand, and take a turn to build their army, which might be a possibility here. On the other hand, they do have the advantage on the bidding right now. If they piss people off too much, though, they're going to have to end up they're not going to be able to end up being able to make that kind of deal by relaxing the ban. Okay, so here's what happens. Bidding happens, and one territory changed hands, whatever this is, Ansbach, over here. Whoop, whoop, whoop. The Swedes then went and bought themselves von Arnim, and they paid like $6 on him for a 3-bid, basically. The Palatinate was bidding against them. And the Palatinate put a 1 bid in on Saxe-Weimar, and the French said, yeah, I don't think so. I think we can get that. And they paid 3 for him. Not terribly useful to him, and in a sense, maybe they wanted to withhold, but the minimum bid goes up as you start getting cards added to him. They threw, what is this, Augsburg over to him. I'm leaving control markers on the places that are there because they are allied with that faction, but they don't count towards victory or income or anything. Not counting towards income is fine because the card's under here and I can remember that. Not counting towards victory, I'm going to probably count cards when I count towards victory, so no biggie there either. Okay, that left only one left, Wallenstein, and the Palatinate really needed someone, so they put a 1 bid in, and nobody else wants to touch Wallenstein. He's just too evil. They sucked in, what is that, Strasbourg? But the problem is, he's going to eat 1 a turn. He's just deadly, and he's not that good a leader. He's okay. The big advantage he has is that he can prevent, he pays off the attrition, the maintenance costs. So if I can get him with a force of, Palatinate units instead of a force of Dutch units, he'd be very helpful there in terms of saving me a few bucks each turn. But he's going to eat a card every turn, and that's pretty damn devastating. And if he dies or something, all those territories go neutral instead of pro whoever. Now, he did not get all of Bohemia and served for more than a couple turns. Well, at least a couple of turns. So that's a little iffy there. But had he lasted much longer, he might well have, struck up the crown of Bohemia as his own territory or something. It's pretty questionable what he was up to. But anyway, there we have it. The French and Swedes made it absolutely clear to the Palatinate, you touch any of our territories, there's no deal. But yes, we will go along with you. And what we're going to see now and the Spaniards will ally with the Austrians, just because it doesn't hurt to do so, is a carving up of Austrian territory by the Swedes and the French as they're in an alliance with the Palatinate. Yeah, that's pretty much, unstoppable. And the ban is revoked on this turn, which means these guys are free to bid next turn at cheaper prices. Basically, the Palatinate's hope is the game ends this turn, because they probably win if it does. They have a lot of territory, but they have this sucker, and they have the problem of other people have expansion capabilities. They do not. If the Palatinate doesn't win, though, if the game lasts a little longer, it looks like it goes into Sweden's hands almost automatically, because France has this perennial problem of the Spaniards to deal with. So France does not want things to get this unbalanced, because Spain can't be defeated, and they will have that as a thorn in their side no matter what, and will not be able to expand as quickly as a partner would be able to. Palatinate and Sweden would have been perfectly happy continuing to attack France and Austria, except for the fact that Sweden really wanted the ban lifted. Okay, so the Swedes open up, doing some forced marches, etc. They take all of Bohemia, Austria. Remember, they had much of this. They slipped through Moravia to get there. Took Transylvania, took Austrian Hungary. They have almost completely wiped out the Austrians. There's just a little bit here and here. No troops, so when the Austrians get their pick, they didn't get to go. The Spaniards did get to go. They marched into Savoy and then back. They can't march into the Valtellines. You have to actually do that diplomatically if you want it. And I probably cheated with that a couple of times, but whatever. And now we're left with the Palatinate and the French left. Okay, and the French swept in, took the Spaniards out of Italy, and then went and took the CBZ. Now, they don't get anything from that, but if the game ends, it's worth some victory points for them, because they control both CBZs. And they also marched in and took a couple of Austrian territories remaining. Austria's down to this. Then the Palatinate went. No possibility of attacking anywhere, really. Yeah, I mean, they couldn't even load up on boats and go anywhere, because the entire coast is covered with Allied territory, except for here, I guess. They could land there. And now we're down to, hey, if we roll a 1, game's over, man. And the Palatinate's saying, please, please, please. Not quite. Which means we push into next turn, which ends on a 1 or 2. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Surprised to see the French not reach the same stratospheric income level, and the Swedes are close, so, whatever. But if anything, both should have increased. But the French lost territories and then had to regain them. They didn't actually gain anything. And the things they regain are over in the conquered pile. So that doesn't really help them. I'm not so sure why the Swedes aren't so high, but I think they made about as much, they just didn't have as much stockpiled. I gotta pay maintenance on the armies at this point. And we had a random event, famine. Now, the way famine spells out, it just turned out not doing very much at all. First of all, it's only going to usually kill a unit, but if you're next to a river, you get to reduce that from 1 to 0. So unless you're in a sieged or looted province or something, you're not going to take damage from it. I think I probably over attributed the damage from famines and plagues at certain points, because I remember them killing most of the bigger stacks. Maybe I'm just not paying attention to the river lines, or maybe I wasn't on them, although that seems really unlikely. It feels like there's rivers just about everywhere on the map. After expenses and conversion of territory up towards control was concluded, we see the money left. Now, the Palatinate didn't have to pay much because they have Wallenstein on top of a fair-sized stack. That cut down, and that's the only military they pay maintenance for. They cut down their costs. Now, but there's a danger. Someone else could turn around and bid for Wallenstein. And that means that all that favor, of not having paid for the units could either be forced out of them or they lose the stack. Either one is dangerous. Or there's also the fact that Wallenstein's going to eat a piece of property each turn, no matter what. But yeah, I mean, if no one bids on Wallenstein, he's kind of a nice deal, turning a piece of property this late in the game. Now, here's the thing. Wallenstein fought early in the war. Choosing him early seems really dumb. In this particular situation where I'm out of leaders and getting that bonus leader when there's no other option, all the other mercenaries were gone. There weren't even ones I could bid on because all the others had been bid on. He seemed like a reasonable choice, even though I didn't fight last turn. He might be part of the reason I didn't fight. Without him, I might not have been able to make that deal. So there's where you have it. Some troops were bid on, but and purchased. I think the Palatinate got the Gendarme, put it under Wallenstein, which might be the dangerous place to put it. Except no one can bid on Wallenstein. There's the only person with enough money to bid on him who's allowed to are the Spanish, and they would love to, but then they have to give him a card, and I don't think they can give him Spain. And even if they did, if they could, it would be pretty damn ruinous to their income. Over elsewhere, other people are all allied with the Palatinate, so I'm not allowing them to bid on that. Now, when we come to the other bidding, there's only one thing really available up for auction, which, no, there's nothing. Nuremberg is the only empty province. So I'm not letting you bid on a province that has troops in it. So, again, no one's really in a position where they're allowed to make a bid. Which means we're going to go into the alliance step, and obviously Sweden and France are not thrilled with where the Palatinate's at. How this is going to fall out, I'm not absolutely certain. We're going to negotiate it because Palatinate does have the big hammer of, yeah, the ban's back in effect. You guys aren't leaving your territories. So whichever one gets the first move, if they make a move against, to try to expand their territory, then they're in a troubled position, which would be a disadvantage compared to the one who moves second, who gets to invade without any restrictions. On the other hand, though, the Palatinate has nowhere to, well, they can grow against the Swedes or French. They can attack those without any penalty. So that's probably what we're going to see. And indeed, the bans were passed. Palatinate made a deal with the Austrians right off. Hey, what the hell? I don't have to attack you. I've got plenty of stuff that I'm going to get to deal with. Sweden and France, though, were the next, and the Palatinate turned to France saying, look, you're the weaker of the two powers. If we work together, you'll, looks like you've got Spain under control. This turn there won't be a problem. They didn't buy any troops. Why didn't they buy any troops? Because they would just be eliminated. They've got to wait until the French abandon. Plus, they can build up their cash because this doesn't go away and they're not paying any fees for having units. Anyway, it's seemed almost a more natural, well, it seemed almost natural for the French to ally with the Palatinate, but I rolled my die and said no. For the Swedes, that seems almost unnatural, and they rolled the die and said yes, which to me means yes, maybe, because it is so unnatural. Because the thing is, the Swedes are a little behind the Palatinate right now, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 26, sorry. No, actually, they're a little ahead. So it may be the Palatinate that said no on this one, because it would have gone to the Swedes' advantage for them not to have a fight. Either way it went, these are the two who are competing for first place right now, as far as I can tell. And, you know, maybe they want to. I'll tell you why, because this is horrible news for the French if the Swedes agreed to join this overall entente. Because the points they might have to convince the Palatinate to leave their deal. The points, the Palatinates get 10 for Holy Roman Empire, where the Swedes get 5 if it's a Protestant. And they both have kind of things that are close in. You know what? I'm going to give them one more shot. Nah. Because they look like they're about equally balanced. But the other thing is, they are each other's threat for the victory. Which means if one could take the other down, it's to their advantage. And a Swedish-French alliance should have more troops and more capability of handling the Palatinate. So overall, that's probably better for the Swedes. What would be better for the French is hard to tell. They look like they're coming in third, unless one of those two really falls hard. Oh, the Palatinate makes strikes into Saxony and Brandenburg using, Wallenstein took Saxony. Brandenburg was taken by the Dutch over here under Meliander, who also went down grabbing Magdeburg and Württemberg. So a major flow from the Swedes, who were in the lead, to the Palatinate. Probably. So the question that comes, though, is did the Swedes want to engage the Palatinate forces, or do they want to balance the victory point conditions again? They might be able to do both. If they can, for example, Meliander, they could probably wipe out without too much effort. The Wallenstein stack is a little larger. Actually, this one's a little stronger because it has the elite Dutch units in it. So the French are more in a position to attack the wealth of the Palatinate in terms of the Spanish Netherlands and, well, possibly even taking out the United Provinces, which would be an interesting option. Swedish counterstrike was to gather most of their forces. They drove into Württemberg, and Meliander ran after one round of combat. So they took Württemberg. But now they're in Saxony, and we've got a field battle here. Wallenstein, the river, nothing's here for the divide. Wallenstein's got a couple of towns to help defend. He's facing a lot of artillery, though. That's why he didn't want to take this as a siege, is all that artillery gets first fire, even over everything except his artillery. Those go simultaneous. Rounds see the Swedish cav storm forward and kind of beat up the I guess they're the Imperial the Imperial forces now, because the Palatinate's the Emperor. I'm regretting having this infantry over here. I wish I had anchored my flank with the artillery, because I can't really move the artillery anywhere terribly useful. These guys came back to attack against this and didn't get anything. I have not fired my artillery, though, so try to pick off that infantry back there. It's kind of cool to use the artillery not against artillery, because if you use it against artillery, it can be fired back at. Okay, so the Swedes were able to dispatch Wallenstein. They beat him in Brandenburg. Or in Saxony. Right? He retreated to Brandenburg. They swung around and hit him from the side in Brandenburg, then continued on, I think, down to Würzburg. Actually, no, they did a forced march, grabbed themselves Bamberg and Würzburg. They're afraid to take Nuremberg because there's a penalty to attacking that. I think it's just a bidding penalty, but... And by the way, Sweden violated the ban here. If I can find my pen. Which means only they suffer the penalty next turn, but the ban can be extended to the French. It looks like the Palatinate has lost. They're not going to come in first, essentially. So now maybe the alliances shift to go anti-Swedish very shortly, but we'll see. The effect of attacking Nuremberg is he has to double on any state for the remainder of the game. Not whether or not these are cumulative. The other ones were not, but the ban and this, I don't know. But attacking Nuremberg is something you can't revoke, unlike the ban. So it is a difficult choice to make, to actually make that attack. And it's not like the Austrians are terribly a powerful faction holding just that one territory. Certainly, the reason to knock them out is just to get the annoyance factor out of the game, in the same way that Bavaria was a reason to knock someone out. And it's not like you can't march in there and declare sanctuary. You just can't take it. Okay. So now a second force over here under von Arnim slid up and cleared out the Palatinate territories. Most of these were recent captures. Well, some of them were. Magdeburg was. Anhalt and Halberstadt were not, and they were added somewhat more easily. The initial attack, whatever that was, ended me up out here in Onungsbruck. So we've really kind of cleared out places where the Palatinate could presumably build forces in the midst of my territory and threaten things like Brandenburg or Saxony, which I'm now going to be able to rebuild my forces for without having to pay for it. That's one of the cool things about those guys. Austrians, like the Spanish before them, have nothing to do. The French, they sent Turenne up, grabbed the Spanish Netherlands, slipped down, grabbed Metz just to fill in territory behind the lines so that, you know, you can't have an enemy army spring up there very easily. It's unlikely it could happen, but there is another mercenary available now, just a generic mercenary that might be quite worthwhile. Not that the troops could be built there, but... Oh yeah, they could. Metz was controlled. And then the other combined force swung through, left some forces back here, and some to protect Switzerland so they can't be bid on. Ran into the Lower Palatinate and defeated Melander there, or at least forced him out. Taking it, went into Trier and took that as well. It laid siege there. Did not take. I tried to fight both a field battle and then a siege assault, but I just didn't have enough gas to take it. So it goes into that. And now we're at the end of the turn. The Swedes do not have 30 in control, but they may be over 30 very easily with everything they conquered. One or two, the game's over, and it is not. So we're going to load this one up as we move into turn 3 here. 13. No, 12. 1 through 3 is the distinguishment.